a good leader, an effective leader is someone who's comfortable in their own skin. One, they understand themselves and they understand what it means to be in alignment, but they're also comfortable getting under the skin of other people. And I don't mean getting under the skin in an irritating way, but to really kind of walk that mile in their shoes, to kind of see it from inside out from that perspective.
Welcome to the next episode of Business Blind Spots Exposed, the podcast. Click the subscribe button and follow us. Listening. All right, let's get ourselves started here. We're on the brand new episode of the Business Blind Spots Exposed. As a podcast, we focus in on this idea that any and every business, every individual has got blind spots. And as I was saying a little earlier to some people, I've got one blind spot more than anybody else in the world. So I talk from a place of having plenty of experience in having blind spots. And blind spots prevent us from getting to where we want to go. And this podcast is all focused on this idea that understanding and seeing your blind spots is an unlock to that next layer. It's that glass ceiling that you want to punch through. So the whole podcast is focused on this idea of exposing those blind spots. And let's try to see if we can find what those blind spots are so you can punch through to that other side. It is live. So throughout the course of this, we encourage anyone to ask us questions, post where you're from in the comments and ask for clarifications. We'd love to have that. We've got a fantastic guest on with us today. So let me kind of read for you, and I'm getting old here, so I need to put my glasses on so I can read properly. Let me tell you some of the things that we've got coming up. On February 12th, we've got Rich Camacho at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on how hiring better employees just became better with data. He's got a data-based approach that he's using to find better employees, search and selection process. Really interesting topic. On February 9th, we've got Sherry Spencer Bachman. She is a pest control coach and a business coach, and she has got something called the $1 Million Climb. That is 2 p.m. on February 9th. She's going to talk us through that $1 Million Climb, that pathway to success as a business. On February 2nd, in a couple of days here, we've got Xander Galloway at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. He runs an insurance brokerage. He's going to talk about insurance carriers and insurance brokers and how they look at your data in terms of giving you insurance and insurance rates. Just kind of a behind the curtain peek at how they're thinking about things. But today, I'm really excited because we've got a guest that I've been waiting to get on for a little while, because he and I talked a few weeks ago and we had a great conversation. And that is Thomas Earp. And the topic that we've decided on today was how to get employees engaged in a role and what to look for in hiring better as leaders. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Vinay. Glad to be here with you.
Good. How's the week been shaping up for you this week?
It's been good. I've had several good days. The sun is actually shining today. It's a rare commodity these days. It's been a very progressive week for me.
That's good. Well, Tom, we're focused on business blind spots. You have worked with a number of companies. We were just before we started the podcast here talking a little bit about neuroscience and some interesting developments that have been frontiers that we've been developing. Talk to me about blind spots in terms of our topic. What are the things that first come to mind for you when you think in terms of blind spots and employees and getting them engaged and hiring them?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is our own personalities, our own uh, preferences, our own styles. Some of that's just historical, experiential, but it's become deposited as habit for us. And what works for us doesn't necessarily work for other people. And I think one of the challenges we have is that we try to do what works for us for them, and it really clashes. We need to figure out a way to learn to speak other people's language. We were talking about the ego, for example, and a lot of what we need to do is what we often call counterintuitive, but I've kind of been pondering the idea that maybe a lot of the things that we consider to be counterintuitive are actually counter ego. It's not so much against our intuition, but it's against our experiential learning, our memory, and our own ego itself.
So I want to pull that ball of yarn apart a little bit there. I want
Okay.
to
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit there, right? And the reason I say that is I think I heard from you. We treat people the way we've been treated, or we like to be treated. Is did I hear that part right?
Absolutely. That's the simpler, clearer version of it. But yeah, we tend to act with what's in our own best interest, thinking that everyone else is like us. We know they're not consciously when if we were asked that, but our natural norm is to just simply behave in a situation the way we behave, and we judge others if they behave differently. And so sometimes we need to slow down. I'll share an example just from my own relationship. I have a very fast paced, uh, driven, passionate, intense personality. I'm very relationally driven, but I'm very goal oriented as well. But my wife she's a stable one in our relationship. She has a slower pace. She's more reflective, more calm. And early in our relationship, she used to think I was angry with her. And it's not just that I speak with exclamation points, the finger. And it's not, I'm not even talking about her. I'm talking to her about something else that happened, but she's feeling and experiencing a sense of alarm because she has a cooler tone, a calmer voice. So I've had to learn to slow myself down, to speak in softer, gentler tones. Uh, I'm not 100% there yet, but the idea is to learn to speak her language so that she can understand me, to seek to understand versus being understood.
So I'm smiling here because I feel like you've been peering into the window of my house too. Yeah, gosh, huge learning curve there too. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about kind of just listening a little bit.
Exactly, exactly.
uh, so I think again, continuing to pull that ball of yarn apart a little bit. I think what I'm hearing here is the way you're reacting to a situation is sort of your filter for a situation, and that's not what the other person is hearing, seeing, or experiencing, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We see
So
that, we see that in our immediate relationships, but imagine going to work and now you've got 5, 10, 25 different people, and they may have different personality perspectives, but every individual is as unique as your fingerprint. And so you've got to speak multiple language. It's a multicultural workplace in regard to how people view and see the world. We all come at it from a very different point of view or perspective.
so I'm going to do my Marvin Martian here. I'm planting the flag on the moon here. I think we found our first blind spot, right? And that is treating people the way you want to be treated or the way you think. So how do we peer into that? How do we find? And I get, well, let's actually start with, why does that really matter? I mean, if I've got 25 employees, or I got 5 employees, why does that matter?
Well, if you want if you want the results that you're looking for, everyone has to be, and I hate to use this cliche, but everyone has to be on the same page. And so when you share your vision, you need to share it in a language that they're actually going to understand. Not everyone's going to understand the vision as you have because they haven't been where you are in the thinking process. So you've got to kind of start with that end and build a bridge to them and then bring them over to your side as opposed to just simply, using that exclamation point. And so you've got people people will tell their own story. I think we're natural storytellers and we all have our own personal narratives. And so if they don't understand what it is that you intend, so if they don't understand your story, they're going to make their own story up. And they're going to have their own emotions and reasons for why you're doing what you're doing. And there's going to be judgment involved.
So this is, we're kind of, there's a couple of things coming to mind, and I was actually just checking while we were talking there. We've got a couple of people online, so thank you, people, for folks for joining us online and listening in. Tell us where you're from, and I would love to hear a little more about your interest level. What brought you to the podcast? Because I would love to dig into those questions. So, tell us what brought you forward. What interested you in the topic? Because the way I think of it, we're all in the people business, and if you don't think you're in the people business, I think you misunderstood. um, so please jump in. This is, you're not interrupting us. I think this is part of the way we want this discussion to work. So, uh, Tom, I mean, I've managed people before. I've had, and it takes time to inspect yourself to find out when you're putting it back into your own language. And we were touching on that idea of ego a little bit. That ego can be a tool; it can also be a detriment as well. You've worked around people, um, tools or assessments. How have you kind of kept that in check in terms of speaking your own language and kind of watching when you're speaking your own language? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because one of the things that I teach is that you need to first be aware before you can become before you can beware. And so I think a
Mm.
lot of it is really key first to understanding other people is understanding yourself. And many of us are not very practiced, not very well practiced at self-reflection and our own sense of self-awareness of not only what it is that we do, but the why behind it and the who we are internally. We have a sort of a hard wiring process that takes place with our neurology and with our personality or whatever you want to call it along those lines, and a lot of different perspectives on that. But then there's that individual, cultural, familial shaping and influence of the process all along the way, and that influences us. My brother and I grew up in the same household, same parents, we went to same schools, we shared the same teachers over the years, but he and I are worlds apart, and part of that's just the nature of who he is and also the way he views and experiences the world. So I think it's us stepping back and really looking at that internal mirror
Mhm.
and becoming very self-aware, self-reflective, thinking about what is it we do, why is it we do that, and then when we begin to interact with other people, we need to understand that they do things for their reasons, not ours. And we often feel like, for example, that people do things to us, but they're not doing anything to us. They're doing things for themselves. We just kind of got in the way. And it's like that person that cuts you off on the highway. They weren't driving around the city all day long just waiting for your car to appear so they could do this. But our reaction oftentimes is, how dare they? And we kind of react internally, but what we're reacting to is not them. We're reacting to something going on in us. So it's becoming in alignment and aware and reflecting on that. I think that's going to help us a lot. Then we might be able to dodge the bullet, so to speak, when other people don't do things the way we think they ought to, or they say something differently to us, or um, they say something that initially might feel like offensive or defensive. We need to sort of dodge that bullet emotionally and reflect on it. Maybe then follow up with a question, clarify, find out their reason why.
So two things, and actually the second thing is I want to kind of bring us back to kind of hiring practices and processes and talking to him. Something that is coming up for me that in sort of my own journey or path, and gosh, it's been a bumpy journey. Um, is this idea that when you are talking to someone and I always have gotten this habit of I've even done it here already. So let me understand what you're saying, right? And trying to get someone to trying to repeat back to them what I just heard. And if there's a disconnect there, they say, no, you didn't get it right. Uh, Really trying to seek to understand as opposed to trying to convince, right? The understanding is trying to, hey, let me step into your shoes for a minute to see it from your perspective. I think that's a little bit of what you're saying there. Is that right?
Absolutely right. People are more likely to seek to understand you if they first been understood. I think more than love, more than affection, more than affirmation, our number one goal and need in life is to feel understood. Most people, and I say most because I know not everyone feels this way. Most people would say, "My parents love me," I poll my students every semester with this, and most of them acknowledge that yes, my parents love me. Well, how many of you feel understood by your parents? The hands start going down, and so it's not about love as much as, okay, I know you love me, but you're not understanding me. You're not. They don't feel like they are understood from the. They don't get me, and they're not listening to me. They're not hearing me. They're judging, or what other perspective they might have of their parents regarding that. But I think that's the way all of us, running around bumping into each other day after day. We just want to be understood,
Yeah.
and so you've got the whole world competing for that. So leaders need to step back and forget about trying to be understood and seek to understand, and that's going to build that bridge of engagement, I believe.
So we've got a couple people on that I just wanted to kind of shout out and say hi to Joshua. Hey, how you doing? It's been a while since I've actually seen you. Hey, good to see you. Uh, Joshua, I'd love to hear kind of what's going through your head as you're hearing some of this stuff. Relevant, irrelevant. You agree? And we got Janet and Nasmol who are both listening in as well. Hey, great to see you all. Again, the same. Love to see what you all are thinking and what's going through your mind, what's appearing. Love to see if it resonates with you. Um, but let's kind of take a little bit of a turn here, Tom, and I want to kind of get back to employees. I mean, that's really what we're all here about, right? And on this topic is so we're talking about how to really understand and kind of to some degree kind of get. I don't. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to say get into their head. It's kind of get into their perspective because that's their head and their heart and all that kind of stuff kind of all mushed into one, right? If we're seeking to understand, we're kind of getting into their shoes.
Yeah.
Is that the key? Is that part of the process? Is that part of the key to retaining employees, hiring better employees? Is that the gateway there? Is that the purpose of that?
I think it is. I think the first, as we've been talking about, I define leadership by a sort of unique perspective, but as a good leader, an effective leader is someone who's comfortable in their own skin. One, they understand themselves and they understand what it means to be in alignment, but they're also comfortable getting under the skin of other people. And I don't mean getting under the skin in an irritating way, but to really kind of walk that mile in their shoes, to kind of see it from inside out from that perspective. And so you need to communicate to them in such a way that they feel like this guy or this woman understands me, that this person really seems to get what it is that I want. And so you entice them not with your incentives, but with their own incentives. Different people have different drives. They have different needs. Some people have a high need for respect. Some people have a high need for recognition. Some people have a high need for feeling appreciated or feeling valued. And it's really all the same thing. It's just we all use a different word to describe what it is that we want and need, but it's a different way of showing it.
Yeah. So I'm actually putting something up on screen here. What sort of uh, tools or techniques have you seen, Tom, that has allowed people to realize the power of data, collecting it, analyzing it, sharing it? How does I mean, there's so many systems that are out there these days. And Janet, thanks for typing that in. There's so many systems that are out there around hiring processes, around retention of employees. What do you make of all that? Is it just a lot of noise?
Well, I think the reason there's a lot of it out there is that I think more so than ever, and I think this has been an increasing challenge for the last 10, 20 years, particularly with the generational changes that uh, the mobility has increased. People have had more choices, and so I think we're all looking for that magic bullet, and perhaps even grasping at straws. I do think that metrics and data are one of the keys to doing that. And it's just understanding what that data actually means. We're going to have different studies. My philosophy with data is that data is just it's kind of like words. Words don't have meaning themselves. The word gets its meaning, it receives its meaning from what you and I attach to it. And so we may have a different use of the same word. And I think data can be that way for a lot of people. But yeah, I do think that's one way to go. I use different assessment tools myself. Some are more qualitative than others. Some are more quantitative. I think there's value to both. It just depends on the beginning point of what it is that you are trying to accomplish and what is the end product that you're looking for. That's and I think one of the challenges that people have when they use these instruments is that they're just it's like going to Walgreens and you've got 5 different brands of cough syrup, and we read the label, we don't know the difference between this ingredient versus another ingredient, so we're just choosing one that looks good to us, but it may not be exactly what we need. It may not be a prescription that will actually cure or serve our particular needs. But I would definitely encourage people to take a look at such instruments as that, but to be very aware of what it is that they are looking to accomplish with it. It's a misnomer to think that if someone fits these 4 or 5 categories, that they're going to be an automatically good fit. And that's where I bring in the qualitative and even a person's narrative with regard to those numbers.
So it's interesting. I've actually used that analogy myself in the sense that data is like text in a book. I always say it's words in a book. If the words are not arranged in the right order, there's no story to be had, right? If they're not put into the right chapters, I have no idea this hero's journey. I have no idea what it means, because they ate the tower. That those words don't make any sense, right? Unless it's in the right context. So I think what I'm hearing from you, and I believe myself, is that you've got to get them in the right order. So when you're reading a book, reading a magazine, reading a passage, reading a post on LinkedIn or Facebook, you're putting those things together so that you can understand what the author is trying to tell you. So I think the correlation you're making here is that the data that comes from all these various systems, it's not about the answer. It's about the ability to have the optics or the perspective into the story that's unfolding.
Right.
Right. Is that a way that wrap that all together?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect analogy, and we've all been in a situation where we read a book and we read the whole page and we understood all the words, but we didn't understand what are they talking about. And it's not that we didn't understand the meaning of those words, but as they put that word together, and sometimes I think with our data, if we're not truly armed with understanding what it is we're trying to achieve with it, people have that data and they'll read it, but they're not understanding it. And they may make some decisions on it, but it goes into a drawer or that circular file where it's never seen again. But the data needs to be understood, and it needs to be used, not just in the hiring process, but I think through the coaching, training, orientation, onboarding process. It should be a communication tool for people to use from hiring point on.
So the funny thing is, you're talking about this. I've got this image that just continues to flash through my head, and it's 10th grade English, which I failed my way through miserably. I had to read Beowulf in 10th grade. Mr. McConaughey was my teacher, and that poor man had to try to get me to see the deeper understanding. I kept reading the words and falling asleep because I just couldn't. I couldn't stand Beowulf and reading it. And he's like, no, this is the journey that he's going through. Can you see the story here? I was like, I'm reading the words and I don't get that.
I'll wait for the movie.
What's that? That's right. Just watch the movie. It's probably a lot better. So let's kind of come back in and talk about. So I think we're seeing that maybe data is a blind spot, right? Being able to see the data. I think the beautiful thing about data is it's unbiased, just like that word, right? Your analogy there, right? The data is unbiased. It doesn't say anything until you put it together with other words in the right sequence. So if you've got these systems out there that are saying you've got an employee that is incredibly productive compared to to another. That's great. But is that the full story? That might be just, I don't know, one sentence, one paragraph, one chapter in that full book. I'm kind of extending the analogy here. Is that analogy still working there?
With the analogy with the book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've got all these little parts and pieces of data as part of, these words that are kind of the text in a book, but they've all got to be arranged so you can really truly understand that whole story, right?
Right. And it's reading between the lines. It's understanding the connections between one piece of data with the next, and how it shows the whole story. There are a lot of studies on successful people that say they all wake up at 5 a.m. and they exercise and they meditate. So it's easy to take that data and say, okay, so if I wake up at 5 o'clock and meditate and exercise, I'm going to be successful. Well, that's not the whole story. That there's a strong correlation with people that are successful that might do those things. But there's also a lot of successful people that wake up at 8, 10, and so on. So there's a principle behind the actual practice that's probably more important. So that data, it needs to be linked to that principle. What is the key factor? The actual missing link, so to speak, between this employee and another employee who have different scores. And it's not just the score itself, but what's the story behind that story? And so if we can play detective and take those layers off, start asking questions, clarify, verify, and qualify that data, then we've reached the end game, the goal that we're all looking for. And the employee is happier too, because now they have the tools to improve their behavior and thereby their performance.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet, for asking that question. That kind of led to a couple of threads there. Janet also kind of summarized something that you had said a little earlier, which I also liked and I wrote down myself. You have to be aware before you can beware.
Yeah.
I think she said, well said. I agree. That's I jotted it down. I'm going to use it, and I guess I'm going to have to give you attribution rights every time I use that.
I've said it more than 3 times, so I do own it now. But you can't. I've learned that way back. actually, with one of my trainings that I went through many years ago for using such assessment tools.
Gotcha. So I want to shift us back to kind of, there's a couple of different topics here that we kind of keep floating around. It's, guys, I feel like we're starting to understand the better story, right? The deeper story. Engagement. How do you get employees engaged? See, I mean, they've been working with you for 5 years, 7 years. They've been working with you for 2 weeks. But I know I've worked in situations where they're not giving me 100%. And the narrative that has been told to me is no one will actually do the job as passionately as you will, especially if you're the owner, right? If I'm a manager, I've got to get some things delivered. Hey, look, guys, I need you to get to this level. Why they, question mark, pound sign, whatever. Can't you just do it? That's an engagement issue. Is it not?
Yeah, I think it is. I think I have two. They seem like they're mutually exclusive, but they're not. And I'm gonna quote Gary Vee on this, so I'll give credit where credit is due. But Gary Vee makes the point that employees will never really rise to the same level of commitment and dedication that the owner does, because they're an employee versus this is my game. This is live or die for me in the business. So we need to acknowledge that. But growing out of that is that the employee will be engaged when they perceive and feel as though the leader is engaged. Teaching in the college arena for 3 decades now, I was talking about student engagement before it became a thing that we studied. But my principle behind how to engage students is that students will be engaged when they feel the teacher is engaged. And I think the same thing is true with us as owners, with leaders, supervisors, and managers, when they feel perceived. And I think the feeling is the real key component there. When they feel emotionally connected, that leader cares enough about me and their role is contagious. And so you're shaping their story in that way. When a boss shows up to work and they just are trying to get people to do what they're supposed to do at a higher, harder, faster level, they just see it more as control. But when they see it more as an invitation to learn, to participate, to grow, I think that's really where it kicks in. One of the challenges, I think, and I think we're beginning to see this we're no longer calling it employee orientation, we call it onboarding.
Mhm.
And when new employees are brought on board, and that's still a little bit of ways to go perceptually with that, but they're on the right path, because it's not just telling the employee what their benefit package is, and not just telling them about what time they're supposed to clock in and how to do those things. It's more of an onboarding to the culture, the climate, and expectations of the community. I think we need to continue that evolutionary process to where it's not just the employee learning about the company, but it's about the company learning about the employee.
Oh,
And then then you're going to flip that switch when they feel understood, as we talked about earlier, when they feel understood, cared for, and that person this person cares not just about me getting my job done, but they care about me growing, learning, and then they'll get that job done. You're probably familiar with Chick-fil-A. One of their top three principles is the person that's the most important person is the person behind the counter, and that's their employee. And they know that if they take care of that employee, high school kid all the way up, they will take care of their customers. And so like you said a while ago, they're in the people business. They're not in the chicken business. And so they hire people with the intent to train them, to grow them, to transform them. And that's why you get a very different feeling. I don't want to offend the McDonald's employees, but you get a very different feeling when you go into a Chick-fil-A regarding their customer service versus a McDonald's customer service. They both have gone through customer service training, but which ones tend to be more engaged? It's the ones that have been engaged by their leaders.
well, so I actually I did a talk about this almost a year ago now, back when people were more than a year ago now, when people are still getting together in person. And I actually I found some stats actually about that, Chick-fil-A versus McDonald's. So generally speaking, broad brushstroke here, that the footprint, the size of the footprint of the restaurant is about pretty much the same between Chick-fil-A and McDonald's, every establishment out there. The cost to get into the franchise is about the same in terms of construction costs, in terms of franchise fees, tax, all that kind of stuff, right? Employee base is almost the same. They're not hiring from different pools, different demographics, or anything like that. Cost of goods sold, chicken versus chicken, it's pretty much darn near the same, right? But if you take a look at those things, they're all pretty much the same. The average McDonald's it generates $1.8 million in revenue per year. Take a gander at how much the average Chick-fil-A is. Gander, no pun intended there. Take a guess.
3 million.
4.4. I mean, that's pretty significant. I mean, you're saying the same volume and the same number of things for the same cost, same types of employees, and it's almost two and a half times greater, just because the employees care.
Yeah, and they're only open 6 days a week versus.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So, okay, that's fine. So I two questions here, and you tackle these as you see fit. Number one, okay, that's for employees that I have. Great. What about employees coming in the door that aren't employees yet? I'm interviewing them. I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is, Tom, this sounds complicated as hell. How the hell do I do this? So I'll let you choose which path to go down, because I think we need to go down both.
They ask the question again so I can see the distinction between those two paths.
So I think what are steps that someone can take to kind of go down this path? They want to get engaged with employees, right? They want to get in, and they want to seek to understand as opposed to convince. They want to understand their narrative, get the words in the sentence the right way. That's one path, right? How do you start to get better at that from your perspective? But then there's also this other component of, all right, so I haven't even brought these people in the door. How do I do it with people who haven't come in the door yet?
Yeah, I think it's first step is probably the same, or at least very, very similar. And it's really understanding your own story. And what we were using the analogy or the example of comparing McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, that it's understanding what your story is. What is it that you're providing, as a company, the culture, the community, and being very, very, very clear and specific on that, and create your own narrative about who I am and who my company is, what's my vision, and then what are the steps or the processes that I need to take to get there. And we talked about it on one hand with employees that you already have, and if you're changing your story, if you're revisioning your company, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to get people to buy in to a new story. But I do think it's possible if you live it, breathe it, demonstrate it the entire process. But then you protect that vision, you protect that story. You only let people into your community that are going to not only serve that community, but I think contribute to it. And I think when we tend to advertise for a job, we create a job description to fill a role or to provide a function, a task. But what we need to be hiring is not only someone who is able to fulfill that duty, but also who has the capacity, the potential to grow, to contribute to that narrative, to that story. It's not just helping us get our jobs done and produce the widgets or whatever it is that we produce, but who's going to contribute to our story? Who's going to help us write the next chapter of that story? Who fits into the narrative already, and it's going to help embellish it and grow it and develop it.
So this is interesting because I try to, my poor children have to learn, as every mistake I make, as I get the lesson out of it, my kids hear me talk about it. Uh, I went to them the other day and talked to them, I think, which is kind of what you're saying here, is I said, what happens in a movie is when you see the king or the queen at the front of, 100,000 troops, what is that king yelling out? Are they saying, I want you to go lose your limbs, get, arms hacked off, and I want you to die for me? And everyone says, yeah, I want to die for you. No, that's not the way that conversation goes, right? And my kids corrected me, like, they never say that, Dad. I say, what does that king, or what does that leader of that big army say? They say, these people are coming to take your families. They're coming to ruin your house. They're coming to take your food, your lands, your money. Are you going to let that happen? And the people say, and that's when, people start beating the shields against the swords against the shield, saying, no, we're not going to have. They're not fighting for the king. They're fighting for their own purpose. It just so happens that they're following the king into that purpose.
Right. Right.
I think that's exactly what you're saying, right? So
Yeah.
you can't fake this. You got to mean it. You got to have that bigger cause, which is that vision that you're talking about. And if you can get them aligned with that vision, that things become better. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's easier, even though there are challenges to hire new people. It's easier to bring new people on to fit that vision, the right person, the right seat, the right bus kind of mentality. And sometimes you're going to have people already on your bus, and you've changed destinations. So it's learning how then to further get them to buy in, because I believe for the most part everyone wants to be part of something. Everyone wants to be part of a community. Even the most solitary of us would like to have more friendships and relationships during this COVID time. Right now, I find myself going to Walmart just so I can get my social time in, so I can see that there are people. I'm not living in the apocalyptic zombie period of time, but there are actually people alive walking around and participating. Everyone wants to engage. Everyone wants to be engaged. It's just learning to connect and speak their language, to tell your story so that it fits their story.
So I heard the commissioner of the NFL talk a number of years ago, and he talked about this idea of building community because the NFL has done a fantastic job. I mean, if you ask anybody in the United States, what is Sunday? Sunday is football day. I mean, wait, what? I mean, where else in the world do you have a day reserved for a sport? Uh,
Uh,
and 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 he was talking about the fact that, I mean, this was Roger Goodell who was talking about this. So, prior to him, there had been other commissioners, and he talked about this idea of how they're bringing people together, right? They may be from the Cowboys and the Redskins or the Washington Football Club. I happen to be from DC, so I always make fun of people who wear the star on their shirt, but they're lesser people than me because that's the team that they like, right? But it's fun, right? It's the fun, and we'll all go to games and we'll make fun of each other, but we'll come back and do it the next week again, right? But we come because we're having fun doing that. It's a community because we have a common cause of just watching the game and enjoying that. And I think that's kind of what you're building, is building that community within your company. I think is kind of what you're alluding to. Am I getting that right?
yeah, I think so. And by the way, I think that team you didn't know the name of is called the Dallas Cowboys.
That's right.
Uh,
I shut it out of my mind.
they shall not be named. Um,
That's right.
but yeah, it is, and I think that's a great comparison because you'll hear people on Monday morning share the story about we did this and we did that, we beat that team, and wait a minute, did you play? No, but they feel as though they are. They're feeling as though they're directly connected and part of that community itself, and so they're on that team, and that's that may be a high hope for a smaller and medium sized business, but if those owners and supervisors and the leaders within that small business or medium sized company, and even some of the larger companies are challenging, but if they'll show that same love and interest and engagement for those employees, then when the company wins, their employees will go home and say, we won today.
Yeah.
And it's not about what each individual player may or may not have done. It's about we. And that's, I think that's one of the greater challenges that we have on the smaller business scale, because especially if it's a sole proprietorship, it's my business. And when it's as it gradually increases to that large scale corporate entity, there's a lot of disconnect. So we have to build a lot of individual teams that see that we're all coordinated and we're all collaborating and we're all working toward the same goal. That's going to take a little bit more effort from
So
department to department, level to
so I'm actually going to challenge you a little bit on that effort. I think there's a shift in how you think to start out with, right? Is it truly more effort, though, or has it just become potentially more natural? Is Does that make some sense?
it, it is. You talking about as it gets bigger or
Well,
smaller?
just, I mean, as you kind of shift into this, asking more questions of your employees to kind of get engaged with them, at some point in time, you don't need to keep asking as many questions because you now start understanding what's actually happening. So, yeah, sure. I mean, uh, if you're right-footed and you play soccer with your right foot, it's tough to shift to the left foot. But at some point in time, your left foot gets just as good as your right, or better, or you use both feet, right? I think the analogy in this case might be breaking down a little bit, but uh, the point is there. I think there's a shift that you're talking about, going from, hey, I want you to do this, to, hey, this is where we're going as a company. I want to invite you into being part of that company. But that doesn't mean you have to, doesn't necessarily mean you've got to pay them more or do anything else. It's just a, hey, thanks for doing something in the best interest of the company today. It's just I'm the one that happens to define what the best interest of the company is, and I invited you into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the closer you are to the ground, the more direct control you have over the success of that. I think we have there are a lot of companies that claim to have a certain corporate culture, and it's on a sign and a placard somewhere in the building, but it's more of a slogan than it is the actual sentiment that the individual might feel on a day-to-day basis. So I think it has to be. It, it takes a little bit more time and intensity, I think, to kind of drive it and let it saturate down to where it is. And you've got to have some real, got to have some really key players involved in there. You've got to have all these different, to use your football analogy, you've got to have some really strong quarterbacks that are going to be, rally the team around them, that are going to be able to call the plays and to call an audible and to really connect and resonate with the team. And the team gets behind them and the quarterbacks behind the overall plan. It's a lot easier. So, but it's just building those small communities to connect and resonate for the whole. But you're
So
right.
speaking, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're right. The more practiced it is, the more natural it becomes for us. I'm practicing brushing my teeth with my left hand. I'm cheating because I have an electric toothbrush, so it's a whole lot easier. That I don't usually, when I was doing it before the manual, I was just having to move my head
Yeah.
because it was a lot easier to control than this awkwardness here. But it's just it's learning to turn off the autopilot and shifting to a focused behavior and to be conscious. So one of the examples I use in this is probably this is how I communicate with my wife. If I'm really intense and I'm going in to talk to her, I take my hands, and this is my natural style. My left hand is on top. That's comfortable for me.
Hmm.
But that's not necessarily comfortable for everyone. So when I remind myself that I need to slow down, be more conscious as opposed to my autopilot ego communicating, I relace them. And it's a little bit awkward. It feels a little weird, but that's how our change of habits are going to be to become more self-reflective, to be more other aware. What we normally do is just pop them together, but now I've got to think about it.
Huh.
If I do this enough times, it becomes more and more comfortable.
So I want to call that out because I actually really like that idea. Just sort of this physical cue to kind of reset your perspective here. And I think what I heard there was left hand is usually on top when you bring your hands together. And when you get to that situation where you notice your hands, you say, that's the trigger. Let me take them apart. Right hand goes on top this time. And that's also kind of the mental cue. And you can correlate that with anything that you like, right? Or change the behavior that you want. But there's an option here to kind of change that behavior and say, all right, let me stop accusing them of doing something. Let me actually ask them what happened and see if that's actually true. Gosh, I need to use that with my kids.
Yeah, yeah, it is because it's we tend to react as opposed to pause, get into their zone, and I in teaching debate has I teach my debaters to ask three types of questions, and this is relational stuff too for husbands and wives, families, as well as employees and leaders, is to ask questions to clarify, not to ask questions to get an answer.
Mm-hmm.
You're not looking these types of questions. It's like in a courtroom when there's a cross examination. The lawyer that's asking questions, it's not looking to win the case right there, but they're looking for evidence. They're kind of tapping, looking for evidence, information. Is what clues. So you're asking questions to clarify. So let me and you've been doing this all along in our interview. So let me make sure that I understand. You're clarifying. You're not attacking my response, or you're not just simply agreeing with my response. You're okay. Let me make sure I understand. And if we can, it's harder with kids because we're very emotionally ego involved there. But when it's our own business, we are too, with people that work with us or work for us, as we might say sometimes. So ask questions to clarify, to make sure that you understand what they're saying and what they mean, not what you mean. And then ask questions to verify. So am I to understand that this is what happened? And this is why you did what you did, or whatever. And then qualify it. Ask questions to qualify. To what extent then? It's just making sure in the broader context of what actually happened.
So speaking of engagement here, we've had a couple of questions and people have chimed in with some thoughts. I would love to hear more. I'd love to hear what you guys are hearing on the guys and gals both. I'd love to hear what you're getting out of this, and if these things are landing with you, and if not, why? Um, but throughout the course of you talking me through that, so thanks, Janet, for getting us on a whole track there. I appreciate that. Um, the whole time you were talking about this, I'm sitting there thinking, next time I see one of my kids leave the faucet on in the bathroom and it's still dripping because they just didn't move it another quarter of an inch. I don't know why they get so on my nerves that you moved it 2.5 inches. You couldn't have moved it 5/8, right? So next time I see myself going to my kids and saying, "All right, guys, so we're all right, guys,
There you go.
we're gonna have a conversation about this. What just happened?"
Yeah, yeah.
So in a month, I'm going to come back and tell you that we have no more faucet problems because they are now engaged and they're coming after me because I'm leaving the faucet open.
Exactly.
So I like the whole idea that physical kind of behavior that you can kind of catch yourself. Give me some other tips or tricks or things that you've learned so that you can start to lean into the employees' world more. Uh, what are the other things that you've learned or ways to do that?
It sounds overly simplistic, but listen.
And well, I mean, so I tell my kids all the time, listening is a mechanical thing. I'm listening all the time. I think what you're saying is not listen, not from the point of view of trying to wait, which I can find myself doing all the time, is waiting to say the next thing at the end of the sentence is let them finish their thought. Is that right?
Right. To actually hear what they are saying, and not only the complete sentence, but do they mean what you think they mean, and as opposed to what they're actually saying. So trying to hear it from their perspective, to listen carefully, and hear what they're actually saying, and meaning. Communication is all about understanding meaning, and so we may hear what they have to say, but they may mean something differently than we might perceive. So it's really hearing them from their perspective. It sounds simple, but again, it's I think that our ego and our emotional internal reaction tends to respond to not actually by what they're saying, but those the meanings that we have trigger previous experiences. Like that water faucet, I might, if I were to ask you to lie down on your couch, I would say, okay, so why does the water faucet bother you? What's the historical relevance of that? There's probably some experience.
Yeah.
It's probably because, like, my father was always coming through, turning off lights. As I leave a room, he would come through and turn off the light switch. It was perhaps a parental, directive that we've inherited. We didn't want to, we just had to. It's an emotional experience that sticks with us.
Tom, I'm just doing a time check here. We're about 7 minutes from the hour. I think I've learned a number of different things from you in different ways to look at, and perspectives is the word I like to use. I've learned a number of different perspectives. Bring it all home for me. How does based on all the different things that we've talked about, how does someone think about hiring in a better way? How does someone think about engaging with their employees in a better way? If you could put that into 2 or 3 minutes, what would you say?
Maybe to kind of piece together the things that we've talked about already. It starts with your own self-awareness, understanding what it is or who it is that you're looking for. If you're hiring, who is it that I need? Not just what job do I need to fill, not what function or task do I need to fill, but you're hiring people. You're not hiring skills. You're not hiring talent. You're not hiring experience. You're hiring people that may have talent, skills, and experience attached to them. And so I think if we look at it from that vantage point first, that they're people. And so what kind of person am I looking to bring on board, invite into my community? And it's I think that sort of flips the script with us a little bit. We do want talent, we do want skills, and we do want experience, but nothing's going to supersede that person is a is an individual, and what kind of personality, what kind of communication style, behavioral styles, what kind of behaviors am I looking for? From my vantage point, attitude far outweighs aptitude. And I have a sort of a mathematical word formula that aptitude times attitude squared equals altitude. Your capacity in your aptitude is fairly finite. It's fairly limited. If you think about that aptitude being a cup, it's only going to hold so much. We have more potential than I think we believe sometimes, but attitude is infinite. And I'd much rather have an employee or a partner, a coworker, collaborator that has attitude squared in a positive way than have the most talented person on earth, because that talented person is only going to take me so far. Another name in football that you might not want to hear repeated is Tom Brady. Um, you know, for all intents and purposes, when drafted, he statistically didn't look all that great. But there's something, and it's not he doesn't have guns, but he can throw. And so, from all appearances, looking at talent, skills, and experience, yeah, fair. But he's far exceeded. He's definitely, I think, a legitimate overachiever. Not that he didn't have that capacity for becoming that. That's how we need to look at our recruiting. We're not recruiting for someone for how good they are now. We're looking to grow our company, right? We're looking to grow that position, right? We're looking to grow in things. So we're looking for someone that's going to grow with us. So I think that would be the number one thing from the hiring perspective. But then to turn around, look at every other player on our team, and think in terms of, well, how can I help them grow? Not just in regard to their talent, skills, and their experience, but grow as a person. And as that grows, their talent, experience, and skills are going to grow. So just remember, we're in the people business, and as you said at the outset, we're in the people business. Customers, clients, people we serve, people we work with, they're all people.
As much as we may love pets and robots and automation and social platforms and whatever else, right? They're still not clicking the buy button. It's people.
Well, that exactly. I believe that the higher the tech, the higher the touch is required. And so this will be even more important for emotional intelligence, for those attitudinal skills.
Yeah.
In the future.
Well, I got to tell you, Tom, I've enjoyed this chat. I hope some of the people that joined us got some questions answered, some ideas, some approaches, and that for me would be success here. That they can go home today and say, I'm going to give something a shot.
Yeah.
Thoughts, questions from your side?
The data. We've only got 1.5 minutes here, but on the data end, as you're looking at the intelligence business, you're not just simply calling out numbers. You're actually focusing on people with that, right?
Right.
So make that connection real quick for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, the way I see it is there's empathy within the data, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what we were talking about, that the storybook. If you can start to see all that data and you put them in the right order, then you can actually start to see the actual story. And as a company, that's one of the things we do is we write story. We put the words on the story in the storybook, if that makes sense. We're authors of the stories. So, yeah, it's a fun place to be as we start to see um, people leaning into their employees more, leaning into their skin, as they call it, from in a good way. It's an exciting space. Um, I mean, I generally love people. I think there's just so much that I can learn from others, and for me, that's what makes the world go round, right? People.
Yeah,
So,
agreed, agreed.
well, thank you so much, Tom. I'm gonna end us here and close us out. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and hello to everyone out there. I'm not looking at the LinkedIn screen, so I can't tell who's been typing in and all that, but definitely enjoyed it today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.